Hey everyone, welcome to our review week. This week we are going to be reviewing the topics that we have been working on for the past little while, including main idea, text structure, and author's work. So let's go ahead and get to it. Before we get going, make sure you have a piece of paper or a pencil around you, and you need your list of transition words and your vocabulary words that we've been working on. Inside of your welcome packet, you should see your list of vocabulary trackers, and you also have your transition words there. So make sure you have those before we get going. All right, so the first thing that we're going to be working on is reviewing main idea. So we know that main idea is one of the most important things that we can practice with. So I want you to pause the video right here and take a look at our words. All right, so we have 4 words on our screen here for main idea, and these are words that we should be familiar with already. So inside of your notes, check to see that you have the definitions for these. If you don't have the definitions, now is going to be a great time to add them in. So if you need to pause the video to write down any different definitions, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure that you are writing something that you are going to understand later. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is main idea. So when we talk about main idea, what we are talking about is the most important idea. We also talk about this when we have talked about it in the past. We've also called it the topic. So when we talk about this, what we're trying to say is that it is the one big idea of the reading passage. Every single article that we read has main idea. It does not matter what you're reading about. It can be science, social studies, reading, even math has main idea. What we want to remember is that this is your big picture idea, so it applies to the entire passage. One of the questions that we came up with main idea, I called it the $1 million question. It's the question that we should be asking ourselves as readers, and that question is this: what the whole passage is about. When we talk about main idea, we want to remember that main idea applies to the entirety of the thing that you read. Sometimes when we read, we're only reading one paragraph, and sometimes when we read, we're reading multiple paragraphs. If you are reading only one paragraph, that one paragraph has main idea. If you're reading multiple paragraphs, it means that the entire passage has a main idea, and it's up to us to figure out what that main idea is. So when we talk about main idea, they can be stated as individual sentences. They can be stated as maybe 1 or 2 words, or it can be stated as a phrase. It just kind of depends on what the main idea of that passage actually is. Now, with main idea come supporting details. So supporting details are kind of like the backups to your main idea. And what I mean by this is that these are the details and the reasons and the proof that support your main idea. Every single reading passage is going to have supporting details to help support your main idea. What we want to remember is that these details help to prove the main idea. We can say that the main idea of a movie is about how to get rich quick, but I have to be able to prove it to you. I have to prove to you that the characters in that movie are coming up with different schemes to try to earn money quickly. I have to be able to prove things, and that's where our supporting details come in. So when we talk about these details, they answer questions like who, what, when, where, why, and how. These are the questions that our supporting details are going to be answering, and they're a really good guide for us to help ask questions of the text. So we can ask questions like, who is involved in this reading passage? Who is the main character? Who is this all about? What is happening? What do I need to remember from this? What details are most helpful? When did this passage happen? When are these two things related to one another? We can ask where. Where did this happen? Where does this fit in time? We can ask why. Why is this important? Why did this event happen? Why is this person mattering in this story? We can ask how. How do the events happen? How do they help me understand what I'm reading? So who, what, when, where, why, and how are always going to help us to support our main idea. So they're good questions for us to kind of understand and remember as we are looking through a reading passage. So this leads us to two vocabulary words. We have the word imply or implied and stated or explicit. Now, when we talked about these words, we said that these two words are opposites of one another. So when we talk about something being opposite, we know that they are not the same. They represent the exact other position of something. So when we talk about something that is implied, we are talking about something that is not stated in the text. It doesn't mean that we can't understand the information being given to us. It just means that there's nothing for us to underline and there's nothing for us to point out. I can't prove it by pointing to it. Now, when we talk about information that is implied, I still can understand something. So what we mean by this is that we can still understand the information that is given inside of a paragraph, even if it's not stated for us. We actually do this a lot when we are trying to get someone to do something, but we don't want to tell them directly, or if we want to try to get someone to understand something without being very stated with the information. So let's talk about that word stated, since these are opposites of one another. So if something is implied, we said that it means it's not in the text, but we still can understand it. If something is stated, it means that it is in the text and I can point to it. This also implies, it also works with the word explicit. If something is explicit, it is stated for you. So a good example of the difference between stated and implied can be talking about the weather. Let's say I want to tell you what, what the weather looks like today. I could say something like, the sky is blue. That could be my first sentence. My second statement, the opposite of that statement, might be saying something like, the sky is beautiful out today. There's not a cloud in the sky, and it's very sunny. So when I look at these, I'm kind of talking about the difference between stated and implied here. In my first sentence, I am stating the fact that the sky is blue. I'm giving it to you. I'm saying the sky is blue. But in the second sentence, in my second idea, I'm saying the sky is beautiful. There's not a cloud in the sky and it's very sunny. What I'm doing is I am implying the idea that the sky is blue. We know that when it's nice outside and when it's nice and sunny and there are no clouds, the sky is blue. I don't have to tell you that. And I didn't. I implied it. You can still understand that the sky is blue. I just didn't say it. Now, when we talk about implied versus stated, these can apply to facts. They can apply to main ideas. They can apply to details. What we're trying to say is that if something is in the text and you can point it out, it's stated for you, whether it is main idea or detail. If you can't point to it, but you still understand what it's talking about, then we have something that is implied. So that's what we're looking at when we are looking at main idea. If you are still feeling kind of uncomfortable about main idea and supporting details and the difference between imply and stated, I recommend hopping onto my YouTube channel and watching the videos for main idea. There are 2 lessons that deal with main ideas. I really recommend watching those if you're still feeling kind of uncomfortable. All right, so the next thing that we're going to look at is text structure. So when we talk about text structure, we want to first start by talking about just that word. What does structure mean? When I think of structure, I think of how things are built. So if you've ever seen a house being built or a building being built, you know that they just don't start with the walls. They have to start by piecing out what the house is going to look like, and you put all of the support beams in before you kind of fill in the rest of the house. That's what we mean when we talk about structure. Structure is just how something is built. It's the underlying components that help you to get to the finished product. So when we talk about text structure is how a text is built or what the text looks like. Now, when we talk about this, I know when I say what it looks like, it sounds like it's a visual, but that's not really what we're getting at here. What we mean when we talk about text structure is that we are looking at how the text looks in the way that it has been created. So what is the base of that text? Where did I start? What is my framing look like? Now, when we talk about our transition words, when we talk about text structure, there are a couple of different types of text structure. And it's important for us to know what those types of text structure are and how to find them. So the first thing that we want to look at is transition words. So when we are looking at a transition word, we want to kind of think about what does that word transition mean? When we transition, it means that we are taking one idea and moving to the next idea. We also talked about transition words as signals or clues to what is happening. So a transition word is a word that takes me from one idea to another idea. They are signals or clues about what is happening in the text. So when we talked about this the first time, we had talked about traffic signals. We know that when you are driving, red always means stop and green always means go. That's not going to change whether you are in California or Maryland. We know that those are clues for us to be better drivers. Transition words work the same way. They are never going to change. When I encounter them in a text, they always mean the same thing, regardless of if you are reading science, social studies, reading, or math. It doesn't matter. Those transition words mean the same thing. So it's important to really start committing these transition words to memory. I really suggest that if you haven't already, you need to start looking at the words that we highlighted from our text structure lessons to show the most important pieces of those transition words. So these are words like however, consequently, as a result, any of those words that we highlighted as being very, very important. So how do these words work with text structure? So let's take that word however. However is a really popular word. It's a word that we see all the time, and it gives me a clue for what type of text is happening. When I read a sentence that says, I really love pasta salad, however, I can't stand green pasta. What I'm seeing is that there is a difference between the first thing I said and the second thing I said. That word, however, always is going to show me a contrast. So transition words, since they're stable, they are there to help us understand the text structure. So we really want to commit to memory not only what the transition words are, but what text structure they match. So let's look at those different text structures that we have covered in class. The first type of text structure that we covered in class is sequence. Now, sequence is all about the order of events. We talked about the word chronological when we were talking about putting events in order. We said that chronological means the order in time. And this is something that we see a lot in social studies. Social studies is usually talked about chronologically, meaning that you start with the first event and you move forward to the last event. We see sequence with timelines. We see sequence with directions and with instructions. When we are looking at types of sequence, we want to keep in mind that these are things that just show you how to do things from first to last. So some of those transition words that we use when we talk about sequence are any words that show order, words like first, second, or third. Any words that show that something happens at the beginning. So things like start or beginning or initially, which also means that something happened first. We can talk about words that mean things at the end, like in conclusion or finally. We also have words that would appear in the middle, things like next or then. So these are some of your big vocabulary words for transition words for sequence that we want to kind of commit to memory. A lot of these we already know how to use, but it's important that when I see this word, I automatically think sequence. Now, our second type of text structure is compare contrast. So when we look at compare and contrast, we are looking at two separate things. When we talk about something that is compare, we are looking for how something is similar or alike to another thing. So we can use this to talk about any person, place, thing, or idea. We can compare those things. Now, when we talk about contrast, contrast, on the other hand, talks about how things are different. When we talked about comparing and contrasting, we used a Venn diagram to help us look at the differences between two things. And that Venn diagram is when we take those two circles and we look at how two objects or things are the same. So object one would belong on this circle here, this half of the circle here. Object two would belong on the second circle. So anything that applies only to object two goes in the second circle. And then your overlap right in the middle, anything that applies to both object one and object two, that information goes in the middle. So using that Venn diagram was one way that we can help to understand, compare, and contrast. We had some specific transition words that we used when we talked about compare and contrast. We had words like alike, same, or both to show how something was comparing. And we had words like however, on the other hand, and different to show that something is working with a contrast idea. So what we want to remember is that these are two separate categories of words. Compare has its own set of words and contrast has its own set of words. So we kind of want to keep in mind that not only are these separate, but they need to be remembered separately. I can't say alike is a contrast word and that however is a compare word because they don't work that way. Our last category of text structure that we worked with was cause and effect. Now, when we talked about cause and effect, again, it is two separate things. Cause is the reason something happens, or we can say the reason or event that happens, whereas effect is a result of the cause or result of the first event. These go together. Now, when we talked about compare and contrast, compare, you can have one article that is only compare, you can have one article that is only contrast, or you can have an article that does both compare and contrast. Now, cause and effect need to go together. Because they are related, they're usually going to appear in one article. So what we're talking about is that we're saying one thing happens that creates another thing. We talked about different types of cause and effect. The first one was just simple cause and effect, where you have one cause that leads to one effect. My shoes were untied, so I fell. It leads to one thing. We also talked about multiple effects. So this is what happens when you have one cause that leads to multiple unrelated things. My example from class was that you get your GED and there are some things that can happen to you. Maybe you get a new job. Maybe you get a pay raise at the job you already have. Maybe you decide to go to school. All of those things can happen as a result of your one cause, but those things don't necessarily have to be related to one another. Now, the other type of multiple effects that we have is a domino effect, where if one thing happens, many things happen that are all related to one another. Kind of like if you flicked over a domino and watched all the other dominoes in that row fall over. And then the last type that we talked about was multiple causes. This is one that we see a lot in history, where we have lots of things that happen that all lead to one event. So for example, wars just don't start with one event. Usually there are 4 or 5 separate different things that happen that all kind of come together and lead to that war happening. So when we talk about text structure as a whole, what we want to remember is that transition words are key. Oh, I almost forgot. We didn't go over our cause and effect transition words. I'm sorry, you guys. So when we talk about cause and effect transition words, some of our most popular ones are words like because, consequently, and as a result. So just like with compare and contrast, what we want to remember is that the transition words for cause and effect are separate from one another. They don't always make sense in the sentence that they're given, so you want to try to rearrange them. If that's not something that you remember doing, what I really encourage you to do is to go back and look over our lessons on YouTube that talk about sequence, comparing and contrasting, and cause and effect. Inside of each of those lessons, we talked about the transition words that apply to each of those text structures and how we would use them. So our big takeaway here with text structure is that transition words are key. It's really important to remember what those words are and how we use them in order to understand what the text is actually telling us. And this leads us into our last idea, which is all about the author. So we're going to call this just understanding the author. So the author is one of the most important pieces of a piece of writing because we want to understand what that person is actually doing. So when we look at understanding the author, we want to start with author's purpose. Now, the author's purpose is the reason why an author writes. And each author has different reasons to write. And what we did is we narrowed it down to 3 main reasons, and we called them PI. We said P was for persuade, I was for inform, and E was for entertain. Now we want to really quickly talk about what each of these three things mean. So when we are persuading, what we are trying to do is we are trying to convince someone that my ideas are right, that you should buy something, do something, feel a certain way. So when we talk about something that is persuasive, what we want to remember is that there are a lot of different things that can be persuasive. So one of the things that we want to keep in mind is that there are different types of readings. So things that are persuasive are things like editorials, things like op-eds, which are just opinion editorials, and opinion pieces. Those are all persuasive. Anything that is an argument is also persuasive. And if you're watching TV, an ad or a commercial is definitely meant to be persuasive. They're trying to get you to do something, feel something, buy something. Now, our I, our inform, is exactly what it sounds like. When you are informing someone, you are giving information. So what we want to remember is that these contain facts. So what types of things do we read that have facts in them? These are things like textbooks. Things like newspapers can have facts in them. Things like recipes can have facts in them. So if you are just kind of giving information, it contains facts and only facts. So that's something important we want to add in there, is that it is only facts. That is going to be informational. Now our E, our entertain, that's exactly what it sounds like. It's meant to have fun. So what are some things that we watch that are fun? So most movies are fun. Movies and TV in general are fun. Things like stories, novels, plays, poems. Those things are all meant to be entertaining. So we want to keep in mind, we want to say, why does an author write? Can I prove it to myself? And that kind of leads us into our next word, which is author's point of view. So point of view talks about how an author feels about the things they're writing about. And when we talk about author's point of view, we have 3 different feelings that we can have for point of view. We can have positive, negative, and we can have neutral. Now, when we're talking about positive, negative, and neutral, positive means that I feel a very good way towards this thing. Negative is I'm feeling not so good about this thing, or neutral, meaning that I either feel nothing towards this thing or I feel both positive and negative. So what we want to remember is that these words can help us to figure out author's purpose. If you are looking at something that is neutral, these are things that are predominantly informative. They are given to you to help you understand, but that's it. They're not making you feel a certain way. They're just trying to show you this is how I feel, or excuse me, not how I feel about something. This is just the information. Now, positive and negative, on the other hand, positive and negative can appeal to both persuade. So they can both be persuasive, and they can also both be entertaining. They work in both ways here. So what you want to keep in mind is that positive and negative generally work for persuade and entertain, and neutral generally works for inform. It doesn't mean that works this way exclusively, but it is generally how that works. Now, when we talk about author's point of view, we also talked about the words connotation and denotation. And again, these words are opposites. In the same way that implied and stated were opposites of one another, connotation and denotation are opposites of one another. Now, when we talk about connotation, connotation is the way I feel about a word, or the way a word makes me feel. So it is very specifically, how am I understanding this word? So in its opposite form, our denotation, we're going to call it the dictionary definition of a word. Excuse me. So when we look at how these two work together, let's go ahead. Ooh, excuse me, I lost a piece there. Let's go ahead and look at a couple of different words and see what their connotation and denotation is. So let's take the words perfume, odor, and smell. So these 3 words have connotation and denotation. So when I think of perfume, I think of something really that smells very pretty. It smells nice. It's something that I want to smell. So for me, when I hear that word perfume, it makes me feel very positively. So I'm going to put that P for positive above it. When I hear odor, odor makes me think of like body odor or trash odor or like a skunk. So in my mind, odor has a very negative feel to it. Those feelings that we get from a word, or the way I feel when I hear a word, that's connotation. So those 2 words have a positive and negative connotation. Smell, on the other hand, is your dictionary definition about what both of those words mean. So smell, I'm going to label that with a D because it is going to stand for denotation. It is just the dictionary definition of both of those words. So it's important to look for the way we feel about words because that leads us to author's point of view. If an author is writing primarily with positive words, then they probably feel pretty positively and have a positive point of view about what they're writing about. If they're using a lot of negative words, then they probably have a negative point of view and feel negatively about the things that they're reading about. If we only see the denotation, it's more neutral. I don't have a feeling either way about those. So our last idea with understanding author works with mood and tone. Now, when we talk about mood, mood is all about me, how I feel. Whereas tone is all about the author and the author's attitude. So we're pretty good about dealing with mood words because we feel them a lot. This makes me feel happy, sad. It makes me feel anxious. It makes me feel full of joy. There are lots of different emotions that we have when we can deal with those. Now, when we talk about tone, on the other hand, tone is the author's attitude. And we get to tone by putting together the author's purpose and point of view. What is their attitude towards the thing that they're reading about, or excuse me, towards the thing that they're writing about? What is their belief system? Are they positive? Are they negative? How does their purpose work with that tone? So just like with all of the other lessons, if you are not feeling quite comfortable with understanding the author, I really recommend hopping on YouTube and checking out the different lessons that we have that talk about author's purpose, point of view, and effect. So this leads us to our last bit of our lesson today, which is, what do I do when I read? Why do we do this? Why have we been studying this? So one of the things that I notice a lot is that as a reader, we kind of get either lost in the reading or we don't really quite know how to explain it to someone else. So as I read, I've come up with 3 things I should be thinking about so I can explain it to someone else. And they deal with the things that we've gone over in our lesson today. So as I'm reading, I'm focusing, number 1, on main idea, because it is the key idea. It's the thing I should always focus on. The second thing I focus on is text structure, because I really want to make sure that I am understanding how this was built so I can explain it back. And the third thing I focus on is the author, because I want to know what this author is trying to get me to understand. So I came up with some questions that I ask myself for each of these categories that you should be asking yourselves as you read as well. So for the first one with main idea, I came up with 3 questions that I'm asking. Number 1, what is the main idea of this passage? I should be able to very clearly say that this is my main idea. It may be stated or implied, but I should be able to explain what the main idea is. And I need to be able to make sure that I've chosen the correct idea. So I'm going to ask myself, does my main idea apply to the whole passage? If it doesn't apply to the whole passage, it's not your main idea. And the last thing I ask myself, the last thing I ask myself when I'm dealing with main idea is, can I prove it? Can I prove that I understand the main idea by choosing good supporting details? Do these supporting details prove what I'm trying to say, or are they really not? If they don't really prove my main idea, they may not be the best details, or I might not have the correct main idea. The second type of questions that I ask myself when I read is about text structure. So I come up with 3 questions that I ask myself. I ask, what are the transition words that I see in this reading? And that's always the first thing that I do when I'm looking for text structure. Because I know those transition words don't change, I know that they're going to be able to guide me towards the correct text structure. So that's where my second question comes in. What does this transition word tell me? Where does it match with words I've seen it before? What's its category? And then I ask myself, what is the text structure of this reading? So if I'm seeing a bunch of compare and contrast transition words, I can safely assume it's compare and contrast. If I'm seeing a lot of sequence transition words, it's probably going to be a text structure of sequence. So that's kind of how I work around those text structure ideas. And then lastly, we want to talk about the author. So I always start by asking what the author's purpose is, because I should pretty kind of quickly get whether the author is trying to persuade, inform, or entertain me. But what I really want to do is I want to be able to ask myself, can I prove it? Can I prove that the author's purpose is to persuade? Can I prove that the author's purpose is to inform? If not, I may not have chosen the correct author's purpose. And that leads me into the author's point of view. I want to be asking myself, what is the author's point of view? How do they feel about this? Is that author's point of view positive, negative, or neutral? What are their feelings towards the thing that they're telling me about? And lastly, we want to cover mood and tone. What's my mood while I'm reading? And can I tell what the author's tone is? So these are questions that I ask myself as a reader while I'm reading and after I've finished. So my challenge for you after today's lesson is to try using these questions as you read. It's really important that we understand not only what a passage is trying to tell us, but how we get to that understanding. So what I'm going to challenge you to do the next time you do a piece of reading is try asking your questions. Ask about main idea, ask about text structure, and ask about the author. Now, if you're feeling a little shaky about any of these ideas, or if you are not quite sure that you remember 100% what these ideas are, head to YouTube, find the videos, and watch the videos that match your topic. If you're still not feeling sure about them, send me a message and I will be glad to help you, because this is really important to be able to understand our next unit, which is going to be argument. These are a good base to start moving forward from. All right, everybody. So just as with everything, if you run into any questions or you need me for anything, I'm always available on Remind via phone or email. So just give me a call or let me know that you need some help and I'll be happy to help you with it. All right, everyone. Have a nice week. I'll see you later. Bye.